panel next, we're calling Nature at Home. We've got three presenters, Dr. Michael Sitvarin, Jamie Rosenthal, and Dr. Georgetta Connor. Dr. Michael Sitvarin is an assistant professor of biology at Clayton State University. His training is in the behavioral ecology of spiders and other arthropods with a focus on predator-prey interactions. This past summer, he worked with an undergraduate to complete a preliminary survey of Jorō spider biology at Reynolds Nature Preserve. He is presenting the introduction, spread, and potential impacts of a non-native spider to Georgia.
All right, thank you to all of you and to Henry and everyone for putting this on. I feel a little bit out of place because I'm a scientist, a biologist, and you guys are all historians. But I couch this talk about biology in the history of what's going on here in Georgia. And I'll tease that you might be surprised. You guys have gone back decades, hundreds of years. You might be surprised how far back my history goes in this talk. But it is focused on this spider, which is called the Jorō spider. This is a large spider with its legs outstretched. It's about the size of typical human palm. For spiders, that is pretty big. They are fairly pretty for a spider as well. Most spiders are kind of brown, gray, dull looking. This one has bright yellow on its abdomen, strong striking silver bands along there as well, some bright red on the underside. The legs typically have alternating black and yellow bands. So pretty distinctive. They will stand out at you from a distance. You guys aren't biologists, but here's a family tree, basically, of spiders. All that matters is where we have this black arrow that is showing where the Jorō spider is in a big group called the golden orb weavers. It is one among many in this group, and they are named because the webs that they weave has kind of a goldish hue to it. And their webs are quite striking. Build these big orb webs, what most people think of as a spider web, big circular structure. These things can be 3 feet across, the orb web, the actual capture web. The supports holding it up can be across this entire room or farther. So building incredibly large webs, the spiders themselves are quite large. When people see them, typically what they will see, here's another view, is the large spider in the middle there. That is the female Jorō spider. They're the ones that are really big. They're the ones building these big webs. But there are 2 males present in this picture as well. The males are much, much smaller. It's what we call sexual size dimorphism, where between our 2 sexes, there is a huge difference in the size of their bodies. And so males aren't seen nearly as often, but when it is time for mating, you can find multiple males hanging out, trying to court a female in her web. The females are most apparent kind of as late summer comes on, getting into early fall. That is when they are fully mature and at their full size, building the biggest webs. They will hang out around until early winter. They will then deposit egg sacs, which they hide away. And then the females do not survive the winter, but the egg sacs and little babies inside of there will survive until right about now-ish, when those egg sacs will be hatching, and then the little babies will come out and start making their way in the world. This species is not native to here. Their native range, as we best understand it from kind of public records recording where they find these things, is Japan, the Korean Peninsula, into China, stretching all the way across into parts of India. This map is likely incomplete, but it's the best data that we have in hand, showing where this thing has been established, where it kind of grew up in an evolutionary sense. But here we are in Georgia. So why am I talking about this Asian spider? It is because it is now found in Georgia. And the history here goes as far back, if you can cast your minds back to the year 2014. This is when it was first scientifically found and described. 2014 was the record of it, late in the fall in 3 different counties in Georgia. They found about 10 individual spiders. So the population at that point was fairly small. Talking to landowners where the spiders were located, those people said they had seen the spider around for maybe 3 or 4 years before that. So we're looking at maybe 2010 of when the spider first came to the US, first came to North America, first came to this hemisphere, first came to Georgia. The question is, how did this happen? And undoubtedly, it was through international commerce. through some sort of shipping container around these counties where it was first found. There is a big warehouse district, and it's likely that some vegetation that was shipped intentionally or not probably had an egg sac attached to it, or maybe a female who had already made it and was full of eggs ready to lay that egg sac. She might have been transported as well. It's really unlikely that a whole group of spiders all got moved together because they are pretty big, obvious things, but egg sacs are very small and could have snuck by. So the scientists who first found these things wondered if we could do better than just pointing to a huge region of Eastern Asia for where this thing came from. So a little more science here. They did a little family tree looking at taking DNA sequences from some of these spiders in their native range. And they took two, they can see all the way at the top there, from Georgia, and compared their DNA to figure out who are the Georgia ones most closely related to. You guys aren't experts in phylogenetics, but basically we couldn't tell if they came from areas, two different areas in Japan or from China. So that was not very informative. Just last weekend, I was at a different conference for biologists where we had more data updated from here. And the connection with Yunnan, China seems to be strongest. They sequenced DNA from 90 spiders in Georgia, and all of them were identical to DNA sequences from spiders in Yunnan, China. So that's southern China. That might explain why they are here in southern US. But there is more research to be done there for sure. So here I've introduced our Jorō spider, new to Georgia. It is not alone here, though. It's got a friend, if you will. We have another group, another spider here in the same group of the golden orb weavers. This thing has a common name I often hear called banana spider. Sometimes it's just called the golden orb weaver spider, but it is one among many in that group. Another large spider builds these big webs. The spider itself, large again, about the size of a human palm. The patterning on it is very different. On the abdomen, the big part sticking up, kind of a goldish yellow, often with spots, as opposed to the bright yellow with stripes that we see in the Jorō spider. It's also got the black and yellow banding on its legs, but there are little tufty hairy bits here that kind of puff out. They actually look like hairs. We call them hairs that you will not find on the Jorō spider. So if you're feeling curious and brave enough to get your face up close to these things, they're fairly easy to distinguish from each other. Another big difference between these things is where they live. So here we've got the banana spider that's highlighted in the blue, and then our new Jorō spider here in the red. The Jorō spider is localized around its initial introduction point in Georgia. The banana spider is all throughout the southeast, stretching down through Central and South America. So the question became, after we realized this Jorō spider was here, is it going to live in the same places as it spreads in the area? Is it maybe going to move somewhere else to avoid overlapping with its close relative? The first work that was done on this, and some of the only work that's been done, was by Andy Davis, who's at UGA. And he was interested in comparing these two spiders. In biology, we have closely related species. We can compare their biology to learn something about where they might go, how they might behave. He was interested in their ability to tolerate the cold. The banana spider lives far south and it maybe does not stretch farther north because it is less tolerant to the cold. And so he wanted to see if there were differences in their biology. Spare you the statistics here, but two simple graphs. We've got our introduced Jorō spider in the red bars, our banana spider in the blue. Both of the red bars are higher. What does this mean? The first one is talking about the metabolic rate. How much energy are the spiders consuming when they're just kind of sitting there at rest? The Jorō spider has a much higher metabolic rate. Bottom graph is showing their heart rate when they are cooled down. They actually put them on ice for a bit to see how they handle that cold stress. When you cool down, most arthropods, spiders, insects, bugs, and stuff, their bodies slow down in response to the cold. The Jorō spider kept its heart rate up much, much higher than the banana spider. Both of these things indicated that it might be much better able to survive colder temperatures. Reasonable conclusion after finding those data is the sentence that I pulled from the discussion from the paper by Andy Davis. But basically saying, we can't say for sure where this Jorō spider might spread, but given its cold tolerance, it could stretch the entire latitude of North America. In its native Asian range, the latitudes that it ranges covers the entire latitude of North America. Those are cautious statements, kinds of ways that we write in science, base it on the evidence, don't go beyond that. That paper came out, got a lot of media attention from reporters. And what started to happen was headlines coming out in various publications with various levels of fear-mongering, thinking about the end of the world, run for the hills, hide your daughters, your pets. So it was very clear that this was a serious problem. And as someone who's been studying spiders for years and years, whenever I see all these sensational headlines, I think my best friends, the spiders, they're getting a bad rap here. And one thing that you might have noticed that was repeated there was about these things coming out of the sky, ballooning or parachuting. And that created a lot of fear amongst people, especially knowing that these are big spiders and they're wondering, do I need to wear a hat, carry an umbrella? So setting the biology straight was an important journey of mine, I guess. So spiders in general are often called ballooning aeronauts. This is an older term, but I think it's fantastic. They have been found thousands of feet up in the sky. This is from government surveys where they fly planes with sticky cards and insect nets and just capture whatever's up there and then go see what it was. These are tiny little spiders. When they first hatch out, they can release little lines of silk from their abdomens, and they are light enough that that silk can just carry them away like Mary Poppins on the umbrella. And then they can drift off in the air for very long distances, land somewhere, and then hopefully make their way in the world. The Jorō spider in particular, studies in its native habitat show that individuals who live on the Korean peninsula and that live on Japan, which is 600 some miles separated by an ocean, they are exchanging DNA with each other. So it's basically one big population, and they're getting there through this ballooning, this kind of flying through the air when they're very young. So here's an image of one of these little Jorō spiders when it's fairly small, and even that one has molted, kind of gone through growth a few times. So the ballooning ones would be maybe half that size even. It is not the big, scary looking females that are flying up and coming down on the sky. All right, so that brings us to the present. This ballooning behavior, getting up into the sky and floating, letting the air currents take them, is what has led to their spread here in the US. This is a map that is current up through last year, where our original locations are the tiny little black and white dots in there, little triangles. And then as the colors get lighter and lighter out, that is how they have spread over the years based on observations from people just noticing these spiders and reporting it online. So they're spread outside of Georgia. They're in all of our surrounding southeastern states. Late last year, we had a record from outside of Baltimore, which is a huge range expansion. There was a sighting in Virginia. Alabama has one. And there was one location that reported them in Oklahoma, but that was one where someone had driven from Georgia and had stuck to their car, a big adult. So this is the example of what can happen with the ballooning, just a little offspring catching the winds and spreading on their own over a fairly short period of time. So Jamie asked me about this term during lunch. Is this an invasion? Is this an invasive species? It depends on who you ask. Myself, I am at the point where I'm considering this an invasion. It meets a few criteria that we use to describe an invasion. This thing has been introduced into an area outside of its native range. That much is very clear. It is reproducing without any human assistance. There's nobody culturing these things and releasing them. They are doing just fine on their own. And they are spreading from their initial introduction site. This is clear from the data that we've got. What remains for those who have a slightly different definition of invasive species is the kinds of impacts that it's having on the world. And a lot of this remains to be seen, as well as some of just the basics of its biology here outside of its native range. And so a lot of work needs to be done. We need to understand more about this organism's behavior, especially this ballooning behavior as the offspring get up and float long distances. And comparisons with our native banana spider are important as well. So more of this comparative biology. We also need to understand how it's going to interact with the native community. What kind of predators are going to eat it? What kind of prey is it going to eat? There's also lots of parasites. Most organisms in the world have parasites. Are there things that are going to come and parasitize this spider? And how will it compete with its close relative who's already here? My background's in behavior, so this box is biggest here because I have lots of ideas about what is this thing doing? How are they interacting with their prey, with their predators? And then these tiny males have to find their females and court them and try not to get eaten. There's all kinds of questions that we just don't know the answers to about what is going on here in the Southeast. Also important is how are they using habitats? Where are they going? Where are the little baby ones landing? What kind of places do they like to build their webs? What kind of conditions do they need to thrive? This stuff is not really known. We're very interested in how they relate to disturbance of environments. So they're looking for old growth forests, which they're going to have a tough time finding, or are they happy along roadsides where it's very highly disturbed? There's been a lot of questions about these things as an agent of biological control to suppress pests. We've got a series of invasive pests that have come from its native range that it may be able to eat and help control. It is not yet known if it's going to do that. And then also just basic life history about how many babies does it have, how do they mate with each other, all these kinds of things. So all these questions form a web, if you will, of questions that we need to answer about this spider. One of the key tools that we have for doing this is a program, a website called iNaturalist. If you don't all have this on your phone, I encourage you to get it today. It lets you take a picture of a creature, and then it will try its best to identify it for you. Taking a picture of a spider, especially one of these Jorō spiders, is an important way for scientists like me to get data. All those maps that you saw is not from me driving all over the place. It is from going to this site and then pulling records from anybody who has this app. So it's incredibly valuable. This is a great question to have undergraduates get involved with. Here's an undergraduate I worked with at Clayton State with the spider crawling on her face, totally harmless. They're small, tractable questions that lots of people can get involved in. You don't need a fancy science lab to do it. And then my point for talking to all of you is to try and suppress some of this panic about a giant spider invasion. When I talked last week to my colleagues as scientists, I said we have a responsibility when we're doing extension and talking to journalists to be sober in our language so that we can hopefully get that through the process of journalism, not have sensational headlines coming out. As a scientist who talks to journalists, once you've said something, then it's kind of out in the wild, but we can still do our parts. And I think by talking to all of you, I can help you when you see headlines like that, don't get too worked up. These things are here. They're unlikely to be going away, but we don't know what kind of damage they might be doing to the environment. They are harmless to you, your loved ones, and your pets, so don't freak out. Yeah, and with this, I'll point out this is the paper that we had that came out late last year about this spider. It's open access. That means you don't need university access or anything if you want to read about it. Some other references, and yeah, stay tuned. We have a lot to learn about this species. All right, thank you.
Give me just a moment, folks. Let me get some of these unwieldy open PowerPoints closed down. Just a second, please. Okay. Our next presenter is Jamie Rosenthal, the founder and CEO of Roots Down, and he has been an earth steward for the past 2 decades. After struggling as a small-scale farmer, he moved back to Atlanta in hopes of integrating earth stewardship into modern landscaping practices. Roots Down was born in 2018. Since then, the organization has converted over 130,000 square miles into permaculture. His presentation is Imagine the possibilities of our landscapes, how landscapes can fight climate change and grow green jobs.
How's everyone doing this afternoon? I can tell you I'm really happy to see the sunshine and really excited to get back out in it. So I will be brief today and really want to rock the Q&A because I know a lot of questions will come of the work and usually does. Um, so yeah, I have been an earth steward for almost 2 decades. I did start off as a farmer, and in my early 20s, I was a landscaper for a brief period, about 2.5 to 3 years in Dunwoody, Georgia. And what I found really interesting being a farmer is that there was a lot of like landscaping that I was doing, but I was actually getting paid for the product instead of the for the service, which kind of irritated me because as a local farmer, you don't get paid a lot of money for doing for growing tomatoes. You cannot beat the prices at your local Kroger or anything. So I found myself very frustrated with that business model. For those of you who will ask questions later about why did I go back into landscaping advocacy, and why did I move back to the city if I own this beautiful, big, huge farm? It was successful in that it taught me a lot about earth stewardship and how to work with our planet to grow a much more beautiful and abundant planet. And the opportunities are legion with landscaping industry.
There we go.
Do I use this or no?
Yep, you can use any
Okay.
of the.
Yep. Okay. So why the landscaping industry? And I see the possibilities. This number is quite staggering. Every year, Americans spend $120 billion on landscaping services. $120 billion. I know that being a small scale farmer, if we had that sort of wealth and equity built into small scale farming, there would not be a large problem with people making money on their products. So what do we get for that $120 billion a year? Well, we get more atmospheric carbon, flooding issues, soil erosion, polluted waterways, low-paying jobs, increased rates of asthma, noise pollution, and a large, I think the biggest thing on here is a large, alarming rate of biodiversity loss and species loss in our areas. I am not going to disparage anyone's lawn today. I'm going to say that we just have probably too much of it out there, and the practices in which we mow it and maintain it can be problematic. I want to be sure because we do want to make sure that there is some good grass out there and there is a really good use for it, and it's to play ball or throw something to your kid. But we just see a lot of grass in today's society sitting there, and it's very similar to this problem that we see when we teach climate change issues, when we teach global species loss and biodiversity loss. I really see no difference between the two of these. I really don't. And I work, we'll talk more about the work that I do in DeKalb County and working with the Board of Commissioners there in a little bit. But one of the things that's really interesting is I get to front face with a lot of developers. And I think that they don't see that their developments are causing biodiversity loss and species loss in our urban areas. So yeah, I see no difference, and wanted to make sure I point that out because I think there's a lot of opportunities to teach us about when we think of climate change and we think of pollution and the environment, we always go to the global issues. We always think, oh my God, the rainforest. Well, we're doing this right here at home. So what if we could do a lot more with our landscapes? I believe I'm going to stop the depressing talk about the problems in modern day landscaping and start talking about the possibilities. Because we are an organization that is really focused on advocacy and education about the possibilities. So when we teach people, we try to say that, these new landscapes that we're trying to promote at the county government and institutional level can reduce food insecurity. A lot of people ask that question. It's like, well, how is that? Well, I think if we include a lot of native edibles like service berries, blueberries, and some non-natives like figs, they grow crazy, incorporated into our landscapes, I think people will understand and get a better idea of how food is grown. And I think that there'll be a lot less waste and a lot more appreciation for food in our landscapes. It'll eliminate park deserts. We'll talk more about the work that I'm doing in DeKalb County, because some of the areas at the landscapes that we've done, we work with the library system in DeKalb County. Who lives in DeKalb County? Good. Okay, good. Does anyone know about the Fruitful Libraries campaign? Okay, we do now. We'll talk more about that. But so some of these green spaces are really antiquated, and they are not used. And so when we started opening up these landscapes and started planting pollinator habitat and little trails in these grassy landscapes, now they're being used by the staff. So, and the people that come to the libraries, which is really interesting, because I think we could start opening up more green spaces everywhere, healthy, happy green spaces for people to use. It's an opportunity. Like I say, I think our public spaces especially have a greater opportunity for STEAM and STEM education. If you guys, I always say that if we build it, people will come. So we started building these landscapes, and immediately programming started to happen. We didn't have to actually do a whole lot for all this programming to be implemented. And one of the things that I like to talk about, being a former farmer and a landscaper, is growing you guys hear it in Washington all the time. Let's grow the green jobs revolution. Well, if I believe that $140 billion a year to grow a heck of a green jobs revolution right in the landscaping industry, teaching people how to earth steward properly with new tools, electric tools, less spraying, less mowing, less blowing, and incorporating more native and edible plants. And we'll talk more about that too. So our vernacular, what I like to say when we talk about these new landscapes, this new landscape paradigm, is it's called productive urban landscapes. And basically it's just a landscape, less productive or more productive than the former, right? So it's a landscape that incorporates native pollinator habitat, some edible species, resilient species, ecologically friendly species, and incorporates a better practice of not using fossil fuels and chemicals to maintain these landscapes. That's really, really, really important, because I think we're overusing those tools. And I front face with a lot of like DeKalb County facilities, and they're vendors, and they're just told, because of the RFP, of how to maintain those landscapes. They're told how many gallons of herbicides they're supposed to spray. And it's amazing to me that they didn't know that they could spray it at so much less. And we got to start crawling before we walk. So I am an advocate of not spraying anything at all, but to teach them how to spray less is the first step, right? And that is what productive urban landscapes are. There's so many positive externalities and environmental benefits of these landscapes. And again, to keep beating on that drum, it increases biodiversity, reduces the use of fossil fuels, reduces water and chemical usage. I want to stop there and talk about that for a second. I was just walking around the landscape here, and again, not disparaging anything, but what I notice a lot in modern day landscapes is irrigation systems. And I am not a big proponent of irrigation systems, and I'll tell you why, especially permanent ones. Not trying to put that industry out. I think it has a purpose, but we do overwater our landscapes. And what happens when you overwater a plant over time? Does anyone know? The roots come up to the surface. So it actually makes the plants less resilient to mitigating climate change. When there's drought, the plant's roots are right up at the surface, and if the water didn't come on, that, for a few weeks, because we were in a drought and maybe a wire got tripped or someone ran over the head when they were lawn mowing, things die. So I like to teach to plant resiliency into the model of planting the plants, letting them dig for minerals and dig for water with their root systems. A root system is just an imitation of the plant that's above the ground. So if whatever you're seeing above the ground, if you let a native, especially native plants, they grow really deep taproots. They don't need a lot of water. I think that's something that people don't really understand. So I want to incorporate, and what we're working with DeKalb County to do is incorporate more climate resilient landscapes that don't need the water usage. And I get that question all the time. Oh my God, well, you're not going to put in any irrigation. That's problematic. I'm like, no, trust me. We just add a lot of mulch. We have to mulch. We have to use, when I say mulch, I say wood chips, which is good. It's also good for sequestering carbon. It's also good for soil erosion. I am all about building soil. Being an ex-farmer, I love to implement compost and increase mycelium back into the landscape. Anyone familiar with what mycelium is? I love to incorporate that into mulch, and I like to use a garden mushroom called Kingstrophoria. Is anyone familiar with that mushroom? It's a really wonderful garden mushroom, and it can be used and implemented to build soil. So I love building soil. That's one of my big talking points. And reducing flooding and erosion. I will say that a lot of the departments, they don't realize that. Parks and Recs, roads and drainage, they all are dealing with the same problems. And reducing flooding, like protecting the landscapes and erosion and making sure that the water's not leaving the landscape, is going to help and have so many positive externalities for all roads and drainage, parks and recs, and facilities management. And they're really kind of coming to terms with this. It's really interesting. There's a lot of social benefits. Again, increasing park spaces and providing opportunities for people to plug into nature, learning opportunities, security, increases health outcomes. There's been a lot of studies with how we interact with nature and how that helps with anxiety, crippling depression. We know we just went through a major pandemic, and I know I have a 13-year-old child, and she was fine before the pandemic and now has a lot of anxiety issues. And we started increasing her outside time. And a lot of our kids were stuck inside at a computer, and I think that caused a lot of issues. So I think I want to point to that. It's really important to get people outside, plugged into nature, because it really makes them feel much better, successful human being. I know it does. Green collar jobs, promoting those are really important in our society. The fiscal benefits. First question I get asked, I know it's at the end, but when we work with departments and we work with local government, they say, how is it going to save me money? It's too bad. It breaks my heart. To be honest, I'd rather them say, well, how is it going to actually enrich the lives of our citizens? I could talk to you all day about that. But what's interesting is they're always curious about, how it can save them cash. The similarities in install, they're able to be installed a lot cheaper than, believe it or not, similar install costs, and even a lot cheaper if you're using good resources like repurposed mulch and wood chips from pre-disposal waste and stuff like that. They are lower cost to maintain. Believe it or not, they can be a lot lower cost to maintain over time. And I say this all the time: it's a benefit center, not a cost center. So these are some of the landscapes we've worked at in DeKalb County. Never mind my business partner in the background texting somebody while I'm out there watering plants. I find that hilarious. But we put this in for comic relief. So these are some of the landscapes before when we first started. They look pretty bleak. This is what they look like a few months after we've installed them, and we'll be doing a lot more pictures this year because they're all really grown up. So we used a lot of cover cropping and stuff to build the soils back, and a lot of mulch, a lot of native species. We work with developers. The Microlife Institute is one of our wonderful best clients. You guys are familiar with the Cottages on Vaughn project, the tiny home project in Clarkston, Georgia? Anyone? No? Okay. It's a really great project. We were able to work with them as a developer. They've got cottage homes, and we built a resilient, no-mow, no-blow landscape. There's not been one single power tool with gasoline been used on this property in over a year and a half. It's a huge win for the environment and for the people out there. They will write testimonials and say that it's been a really quiet, beautiful neighborhood for them to live in. Some of the what it looked like before at some of the public libraries. That's Clarkston Public Library there, and what it looked like about 5 months after we planted it, and it looks so much better now. You'll have to go out there this spring. We're going to be doing tours, so please let us know if you guys want to sign up on anything. It's on our website. We have a really robust website. So I want you guys to know, like, it's really easy to plug in. We don't stand on ceremonies. We'd love for you guys to come out. We have a good time with all of our events. We do a lot of people engagement interactions. One of our really great partners is Independent Distilling. It's in Decatur, Georgia. It's where we host a lot of our workshops and parties. We like to have a lot of parties because, you know, solving climate change is bleak, but we want to have fun while we're doing it. So for those of you guys want to check out our website, it's www.rootsdownga.com. We are on Instagram. Please follow us. Please give a like. We have a really great program for youth as well. So if you guys have anyone going to college at Agnes Scott Emory University, GSU, Georgia Tech, we offer what's called the Green Hive Leadership Program, and that's backed by our foundation. And what that does is teach the youth to make local climate change a possibility right in government, small government, county government, and municipalities, because they could change. We wrote a policy called the Fruitful Libraries Resolution that was spearheaded by our youth. And that was the biggest win, I think, in DeKalb County. It passed the Fruitful Libraries Resolution. And now they are putting together a transition plan to change all 23 libraries over to this new paradigm. That's over 75 acres. Yep. And it was written by a 25-year-old cohort from our company. So we're really, really excited to be able to implement that. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, we'll get to them later.
Another excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Let me get the next show up and we'll get it introduced in just a moment. Our next presenter is Dr. Georgetta Connor, a native Romanian. She obtained her Bachelor's of Science in Geography at the University of Bucharest, followed by an MA in Education and a Doctor of Philosophy in Geography at the University of Georgia. Since 2012, she has taught human geography at Georgia Gwinnett College, and her presentation is Rethinking Informal Urbanism in Metro Atlanta. Dr. Connor?
Good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction. Also, I would like to thank the Georgia Archives for information regarding this symposium, especially because last year, geography is together with history in the new created Department of History Geography, and we can express better our research, including with the Georgia Archives. As I was presented, I am full-time associate professor of geography, living in Romania a long time, including during the communist system. The agriculture was a big issue, especially because the government of Romania, the communist government of Romania, in order in 1989 revolution to have zero debts on the international arena, they had to export almost everything. And number one exporter was food. And because of this, culture, garden, the individual person or community was very important to cover the needs of food as a result of exporting too much food. Maybe it's hard to understand how people have to go in the morning, sometimes at midnight, to stay in line just to be able to buy some food, especially family having children. And coming to the United States 6 years ago, my husband is American. During my master and especially PhD at the University of Georgia, I finished a PhD coursework in Romania, in the second city, Iași, Romania, in urban geography. After 4 years, all exam done, started Eastern European Revolution, and everything was upside down, and I did not finish my dissertation. Coming to the United States, I decided to do, and I did. Teaching human geography at the University of Georgia is a teaching assistantship and instructor. And then during my working on my dissertation, I selected Romania integration into the European Union, focusing on agriculture and rural development. And finishing my program at the University of Georgia until writing 485 pages my dissertation, I was invited by Gainesville State College 2008-2012 to teach. And then in 2012, I moved to Georgia Gwinnett College. And teaching human geography, we decided in the University of Georgia system, the professors, faculty in general, it's encouraged to write their textbook in order to save money for our students. And writing our human geography textbook, I selected agriculture and food, and human settlement. Now, I have experience from Europe, communist system with agriculture, and the so-called democracy after 1989 under the agriculture requirement of European Union. Now, here at the University of Georgia Gwinnett College, I work with a student who was owner in agricultural farms, and I understood a little better the goals of this agriculture, urban. I'm a little confused because reading the materials, it's required or encourage more urban agriculture. But if you buy a house, like my husband and I, in a subdivision, they specify no agriculture in your courtyard, which probably there are some important explanations. But in any case, agriculture, urban agriculture, especially Georgia, for example, with around 90,000 square miles, it's approximately like Romania, 91,000 and something square miles. And here, our population is double. Therefore, it's a lot of available land around the city, which it's a good idea, especially for those interested to cultivate, to grow organically. And I try to explain what I discovered. To see. Yeah. Okay.
There we go. There we go.
Okay. My outlines focusing on general presentation in compare with other cities, and It's like in the entire country and other countries, cities and communities are used vacant and less used spaces for urban agriculture and together urban farms, community garden and local market are gaining recognition. It is considered even vital for economy, for social and cultural, including environmental security. I pay attention, especially in urban gardening program. On the one hand, on the other hand, regulatory framework to establish permanent agricultural user. Now, I use, in addition to a PhD in geography, I study qualitative research, and in general, in my research, I use this method of qualitative research, sometimes mixed with qualitative. But in this case, current data research in the field a little. It's for me, it's a first step in doing research for Atlanta area. But also I have personal belief. Through experience, I was born in a village and I study agriculture, including my dissertation for PhD. This study explored the potential for food production in Metro Atlanta and the way a city can revise their regulatory framework. The goal is to reach sustainable food production, which means encouraging gardening, but also removing some barriers and creating more opportunity for those interested in. Here, I do not understand why I think it's here. I mentioned here my research, the method, and as an opinion, as my hypothesis, I hypothesize that farming within Metro Atlanta is a positive thing, not only allowing Metro Atlanta to have sustainable food source that but also to providing a job for some people. To see if I can. Okay. Urban agriculture, some general, the pictures, one is for Chicago and the rest is Atlanta. It's a urban farming or gardening. It's not only here, it's a global movement. Encouraging people to cultivate, to process, and distribute food around the town or city. Now there are, still are differences, sometimes significantly, between core, most developed countries and periphery developing countries. In sometimes in the core can be different opinion between the past and the current. Sometimes urban agriculture was discouraged, and now with climate change, with economy, with issues significantly bad in some parts of the globe, urban agriculture is encouraged. But in the periphery and the developing countries, it's like a necessity. Sometimes food obtained can be an important, not only business, but the existence of the, okay. And next graph shows the major goals of the farming, the urban agriculture, which is for sustainable city. It's created and trying to create different ways, important for socially, environmental, and economically. And to be a little shorter, for Atlanta, some overview is like many cities in this country, there are around the big cities important areas which can be used for agriculture. Now the number of community gardens increases significantly, and I mentioned there for all the information. 2007, even in 2007, was important decision beginning with Adopt a Garden program. If in 2008 or approximately 100 communities gardens, perhaps they are over 300 community gardens in Metro Atlanta, and is considered, even though the double or even more, is considered Atlanta full urban agriculture potential is not yet met. Therefore, there is continue to exist underutilized land. And here are some examples of food and the map in the Metro Atlanta community garden and social garden. I work in one semester with a colleague, GGC, trying to work with some students, interesting to work a little on the garden, Georgia College, and they can be used individually, or who knows, maybe for their future business. And here's some example of states in the Metro Atlanta with harvested with total farms acres. And here, about the zoning for production in Metro Atlanta, it's important to emphasize some situation offering access and other prohibition, for example. And I mentioned the district regulation, specifically mentioned community garden, the conservation subdivision district, which lists the community garden as a permissible use to meet the green space requirement, and Beltline overlay district, which is private property owners. Each county code of ordinance contain a zoning resolution outlining the county agricultural district regulation. There are several obstacles for urban agriculture regulation. For example, food vending permits that need the people amount of money to pay in order to have a permit. I mentioned there $75, but now it was maybe it's much more during this time. In conclusion, even with all effort for extended urban agriculture in Atlanta area and obtaining some food, we can see local food in different grocery store. It's considered Georgia residents consume less locally produced food than national average. And some positive, and I have to finish on. I mentioned here agricultural production, Georgia top, maybe it's considered the state #1 industry, taking into consideration the amount money there. This means the increase of production local growing food through farms, garden with in Metro Atlanta will increase the Georgia revenue. It's for Metro Atlanta to have a sustainable food production sources means that will be developed even more, no more need in the future, maybe to import so much food from other areas. And other potential, did I do something wrong? Some images, the Metro Atlanta, other potential. It's encouraged this even for the quality of food. Food created, obtained around in the garden, for example, is considered superior quality than that food imported from very different areas. In conclusion, Metro Atlanta will continue to be an important area for with land in the or abandoned land or not very good for as a building areas, and extended more this branch of economy will be important source of food, and perhaps this will be in the future years. Thank you. I don't want to continue to that. Okay, thank you.